Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The morning light drifted gently through sheer curtains, casting golden streaks across the white and beige bedroom Rachel once called a sanctuary. She sat upright in the vast emptiness of the king-sized bed, legs tucked under her silk robe, staring at the untouched pillow beside her. Carter hadn't come home last night. Again, her phone sat silent on the nightstand, no missed calls, no new messages. It was the third time this week. The silence was not new, but it had begun to take on weight, like something pressing down on her chest. She leaned forward and picked up the colorful piece of paper left beside her phone. Ileana's latest drawing, 3 stick figures with giant smiles, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. The label in wobbly crayon read, "Mommy, Daddy, me." Rachel smiled softly but without warmth. Her fingers lingered over Carter's name before she folded the paper and pressed it to her chest. "You deserve better, sweetheart," she whispered into the still air. After Eliana left for school, Rachel found herself wandering the house as if it were a museum of a life that no longer existed. Her heels clicked softly against the marble tiles as she moved from room to room, each space filled with memories now hollowed by absence. In the hallway, her gaze fell on a large wedding portrait, Rachel and Carter smiling under a cascade of white roses, young, proud, invincible. She stood before it, emotion catching in her throat. "Where did we go?" she asked the silence, not expecting an answer. In the kitchen, she brewed a pot of tea she wouldn't finish. She sat at the dining table set for 2, but only one chair was pulled out. Her phone buzzed once she reached for it, only to see a calendar reminder. Anniversary in 3 days. Her hand trembled as she silenced it. There would be no anniversary celebration this year. No flowers, no dinner, no apologies. Just distance, and a woman named Diana, whose perfume now lingered faintly on Carter's clothes. Rachel rose from the table slowly, her movements measured. There were no tears today, only a growing stillness within her. Something had shifted. She didn't have answers yet, but she was starting to see the storm for what it was. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. The kitchen was warm, the air filled with the soft aroma of rosemary chicken and baked yams. Rachel stood by the stove, carefully plating the meal onto 2 dishes with practiced hands. She had spent the afternoon preparing Carter's favorite dinner, just like she used to in the early days when he came home on time, kissed her forehead, and pulled Eliana onto his lap while she talked about her day. But tonight, like the last few nights, only one seat would be filled. She lit the candles anyway, dimmed the overhead lights, and placed a soft, instrumental playlist on the speaker. The table looked perfect, too perfect for a woman dining alone. Rachel sat at her usual spot and glanced at the door as though he might walk in at the last second, toss his jacket on the chair, and say, "Sorry I'm late." But there was nothing, just the slow clink of her fork tapping porcelain. Each bite was mechanical, tasteless. Not because the food lacked flavor, but because the warmth that once filled this space had long vanished with Carter's presence. Halfway through the meal, the sound of small feet echoed down the hallway. Eliana appeared in her pajamas, her textbook hugged tightly against her chest. "Mommy, can you help me with my math?" she asked with a shy smile. Rachel quickly set down her fork and opened her arms. "Of course, baby. Come sit by me." Eliana climbed onto the chair beside her, placing the book between them. Rachel helped her navigate a page full of fractions, her voice soft but steady. When Eliana paused and asked, "Is Daddy eating with someone else tonight?" Rachel hesitated. The question cut deeper than she expected. "I don't know, sweetheart," she answered honestly, tucking a stray curl behind her daughter's ear. "But I'm here, and I'm always going to be." After finishing homework, Rachel tucked Eliana into bed, reading her favorite story and humming the lullaby she used to sing when Carter still joined them for bedtime. Once her daughter drifted off, Rachel returned to the table, now cleared except for one untouched plate. She stared at it for a long time before finally packing the food into the fridge. She washed the dishes slowly, deliberately, as if cleaning away the ache she didn't speak of. When the last dish was dried and shelved, She leaned against the counter and whispered, "Tomorrow will be different." And somehow she knew it would. At Monroe Holdings headquarters, the atmosphere had begun to shift. Staff moved about as usual, but a new energy buzzed behind the frosted glass of the executive floor. Everyone knew who Diana Gray was now, more than just Carter Monroe's executive assistant. She had become his shadow. She laughed a little too loudly at meetings, wore dresses that skirted the line of professionalism, and carried herself like someone who already had one foot in the throne. The older board members exchanged knowing glances, and the junior employees swapped whispers by the vending machines. "She came in 6 months ago and already parks beside the CEO," one said. "She's even using his driver," another added. Maverick Stone, now head of legal compliance, kept mostly to himself, but he noticed it all: the glances, the paper trails, and the unexplained budget entries. He had worked with Carter for years, had once admired his ambition, but now he watched with quiet suspicion, especially after he saw Diana walk into Carter's office one morning and not come out for almost 2 hours. That same afternoon, Maverick passed by the glass conference room where Diana sat beside Carter during a strategy meeting. She leaned in too close, her laugh too casual, as if they were lovers, not co-workers. Maverick didn't flinch, but something in him clicked. When the meeting ended, he walked briskly to his office and pulled out an old contact card, Rachel Monroe's name still written in his neat handwriting. They hadn't spoken in a while, but he remembered her clarity, her brilliance in the early stages of the company. She had been just as integral to building the brand as Carter had, even though her name had slowly faded from the headlines. He stared at the card for a few moments, then slid it into his drawer without a word. He didn't want to get ahead of things, not yet, but his gut told him Rachel needed to be informed. That evening, as Carter and Diana left the building together, her hand briefly brushing his arm, Maverick stood by the window overlooking the parking lot. He said nothing, did nothing, but he opened a private file on his computer titled Contingency Monroe and began typing. Not to sabotage, but to prepare. Because whispers only lasted so long before they became storms, and storms had a way of demanding the truth. Rachel sat across from the empty chair at Le Jardin, the soft clatter of cutlery and hushed murmurs of other couples echoing in her ears. The dim candlelight flickered between her and the untouched glass of wine Carter had ordered for her every year since their second anniversary. Except this year, he wasn't here. Her dress, a navy silk gown she had picked specifically because he once said it made her look like royalty, now felt too heavy against her skin. Every few minutes, she glanced at the restaurant entrance, hoping, no, willing, his silhouette to appear. But as the minutes turned into an hour, and the hour into 2, the truth settled like lead in her chest. He wasn't coming. The waiter approached her gently, offering to box up the untouched second entree. Rachel smiled politely. "No need," she said softly. "It was never meant to be eaten." She signed the check and stood, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she walked out, head high, heart aching. The sky had started to drizzle outside. She didn't run from it. She let the rain fall softly against her skin, as if washing away the lie that he would show up. A few miles away, at the exclusive Hibiscus Heights Hotel, Carter walked hand in hand with Diana into a private suite already adorned with rose petals. She giggled, tossing her purse onto the velvet chaise, clearly comfortable, clearly confident. "You're really not going to call her?" she asked as she slipped off her heels. Carter shrugged. "She'll be fine. Rachel understands these things." Diana chuckled. "She's patient, not blind." But Carter wasn't listening. He was busy pouring champagne. Meanwhile, back in her car, Rachel sat with the engine running but unmoving, staring at the empty passenger seat. She pulled down the mirror and looked at herself, not just her face, but her eyes. They looked older tonight. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her finger hovered over his contact before she locked the screen and tossed the device onto the seat beside her. She didn't need to know where he was. She already did. What she needed now was clarity, not closure. As the wipers began to sweep slow arcs across the windshield, Rachel whispered, "You're not coming back." "Not really." And for the first time, she let the rain say the rest. Rachel rarely went through Carter's personal laptop, but that morning something urged her to. His device, carelessly left on the living room console, blinked awake at the touch of her fingers. The password hadn't changed. Inside the photo library, hundreds of folders were organized by project codes and business trips until she found one marked GD. Her breath hitched. Inside were dozens of images. Diana, smiling coyly in Carter's penthouse, lounging in his robe, posing in red lingerie, Rachel had once picked out for a romantic getaway that never happened. She scrolled slowly, each picture another crack in the glass she had carefully held between them. One image stopped her cold. Diana at a private dinner wearing the emerald necklace Rachel had told Carter she adored. He had claimed it wasn't her style. Rachel's hand trembled on the mousepad. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, she plugged in a flash drive and began saving every image, dragging them into a labeled folder with methodical calm. Personal archive. Just as she finished, Eliana called from the hallway. "Mommy, I'm ready for school." Rachel closed the laptop quickly and called back with practiced cheer, "Coming, baby." She took one last glance at the screen before shutting it. The weight of betrayal pressed against her chest like a stone, but she straightened her shoulders and smoothed her blouse. Driving Eliana to school that morning, Rachel smiled through her rearview mirror, sang along softly to the radio, and asked about her daughter's class art project. Eliana giggled, her little voice rising like sunlight breaking through clouds. At the school gate, Rachel kissed her daughter's cheek and watched her skip into the building before returning to the car, the smile now gone from her lips. She gripped the steering wheel tightly. A single sentence echoed in her mind. He doesn't even hide it anymore. When she arrived back home, she stored the flash drive in a velvet pouch and placed it behind a row of photo albums in her study. Not for revenge, but for remembrance. Proof. Truth. Later that night, she lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling. The space beside her remained cold. "This house is getting too quiet," she whispered to no one. And perhaps in that silence a new kind of strength began to rise. Carter's cologne no longer smelled like him. Rachel noticed it the moment she helped him gather his suit jacket for a dinner he never intended to attend with her. The scent was sweeter, too floral. Diana's perfume had clung to it like a mark. As he muttered a quick excuse about a late meeting, Rachel gave him a long look. "That tie doesn't match your suit," she said quietly. Carter, barely glancing at her, responded, "She picked it out." The slip was subtle, but it was enough. He left without another word, and Rachel stood alone in the foyer, holding the faintest trace of someone else on the man she once thought was hers. Over the following days, Diana's presence bled into the house like a slow leak. A lipstick in Carter's briefcase, a pearl earring tucked behind a sofa cushion, a faint imprint of a shoe too small to be Rachel's at the foot of the guest bed. Rachel said nothing. She simply began taking pictures, documenting the intrusions like a crime scene investigator, quietly, deliberately. Diana, emboldened by Rachel's silence, began playing her part more openly. She started sending flowers to Carter's office, tagging him in vague captions on social media, even calling the house phone once. "Oh, I thought this was his private line," she cooed when Rachel answered. "My mistake." Rachel didn't hang up. She let the silence do the talking. Diana chuckled before ending the call. Later, Rachel stood by the window and watched Carter's car pull into the driveway. Diana was in the passenger seat, laughing. Rachel didn't flinch. She didn't greet him at the door. She simply turned away and resumed folding Eliana's laundry. It was as if the walls were shifting around her, closing in. But Rachel didn't resist. She allowed the discomfort to settle. Every woman has a threshold, and Rachel's was being drawn with invisible ink. That night, as she tucked Eliana into bed and listened to Carter laughing faintly downstairs on the phone, she whispered into the dark, "They think I'm defeated." Her voice was calm, steady, but behind her eyes, something was sharpening. And Diana, in her arrogance, had no idea she was not outplaying Rachel. She was provoking her. The morning was quiet, unusually so. Carter had taken an impromptu trip to meet investors, and Rachel found herself walking through the house with no footsteps following her. Eliana was at school, the staff were out of sight, and the world, for a moment, gave her solitude. She made her way to the master bedroom closet, a walk-in chamber of suits, gowns, and memories. In the back corner, behind a row of winter coats, was a small, matte black safe. She hadn't opened it in years. She knelt, input the code with steady fingers, and heard the soft click as the door released. Inside were bundles of documents, old contracts, insurance records, photos, and a sealed brown envelope marked with Carter's initials. Rachel's eyes locked on it. Slowly, she reached inside, lifted the envelope, and slipped it into her handbag without opening it. She didn't need to read what she already remembered. It wasn't the time to act, not yet. But she needed it close, like armor beneath clothing. She closed the safe gently, careful not to leave a trace. Rising, she glanced at herself in the mirror. Her face was unreadable, but her posture had shifted, straighter, firmer, unshakable. She descended the stairs and passed through the living room, where Diana's perfume still lingered faintly in the air. The scent didn't disturb her anymore. If anything, it reminded her of what needed to be done. That evening, Carter called briefly. "Hope Eliana's okay," he said, not even bothering to ask about Rachel. "I'll be back late tomorrow. Don't wait up." She replied softly, "I won't." After ending the call, Rachel sat in her study, staring at the envelope now placed beside a stack of family photographs. 1,000 thoughts swirled in her mind, but she spoke none of them aloud. Instead, she took out a blank journal and wrote just one sentence across the first page. They left the door wide open. Then she closed the book, locked it in her drawer, and turned off the lights. The house may have felt haunted with betrayal, but Rachel no longer feared the ghosts. She was learning how to walk among them, without losing herself. The evening sky was painted in soft orange hues as Rachel sat at the edge of Eliana's bed, brushing through her daughter's thick curls. It was their nightly ritual, one of the few things that remained untouched by the chaos brewing silently behind closed doors. "Do you want 2 braids or a big puff tomorrow?" Rachel asked with a warm smile. Eliana wrinkled her nose, thinking. "Puff," she decided. "It makes me feel like a superhero." Rachel laughed gently and kissed the top of her head. The moment was tender until Eliana looked up at her with an innocent, piercing question. "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy eat dinner with us anymore?" Rachel froze for half a second, her hand pausing mid-stroke. She took a deep breath and continued brushing, her voice soft and even. "Sometimes grown-ups get really busy and forget what matters most. But it doesn't mean they don't love us." Eliana's eyes searched her mother's face. "Do you still love Daddy?" Rachel smiled faintly and tucked the blanket under her arms. "I love you," she replied, avoiding the rest. "That's what matters tonight." After Eliana drifted to sleep, Rachel walked slowly to the hallway, her hands still tingling from the weight of her daughter's question. She leaned against the wall, staring at the family photos arranged across the hallway, moments frozen in happier times. Carter holding Eliana as a baby, their first family vacation. The smiles, the embraces, all of it looked staged now, like a show that had long since closed, but the posters still hung. She turned her eyes away and walked into the guest room, where a small table lamp cast a warm circle of light. Sitting down, she opened her journal again. This time she wrote, "When children ask the questions we avoid, we are forced to face the truth we hide." Downstairs, her phone buzzed with a message from Carter, spending the night at the office. "Don't wait up." Rachel stared at the screen for a long time before typing and deleting a dozen replies. In the end, she sent nothing. Silence had become her most powerful response. She placed the phone face down, turned off the light, and whispered into the dark. "She's asking questions now, and I owe her the answers, just not yet." The cafe was quiet, tucked between a bookstore and an art gallery, a place that once held memories of vibrant conversation and laughter. Rachel hadn't been there in years, but Maverick had chosen it intentionally. It was where he and Rachel first met, back when she and Carter were just beginning their journey, back when she was bright-eyed and full of plans. She walked in slowly, the soft chime of the bell above the door greeting her. Maverick was already seated by the window, sipping a black coffee, his leather journal open beside him. When he looked up and saw her, his face softened. "You haven't changed much," he said with a small smile. Rachel sat across from him, folding her hands neatly on the table. "You have," she replied, meeting his gaze. "In a good way." There was a brief silence between them, comfortable, reflective. "I've heard things, Rachel," Maverick said quietly, "and I need to know if they're true." Rachel tilted her head slightly. "Depends on which things you've heard." Maverick nodded, choosing his words with care. "Carter's new assistant, Diana Gray. People are talking. But more importantly, I've seen things that don't add up. Financial overlaps, missing files." Rachel didn't blink. She simply reached into her purse and placed a small flash drive on the table. "Everything I've found so far is on there. Pictures, patterns, evidence." Maverick didn't touch it immediately. He just stared at her. "Why now?" he asked. "Why share this with me?" Rachel's voice was calm, but laced with meaning. "Because I trust you. And because I'm not ready to make a move, but I want to be ready when the time comes." Maverick nodded slowly, taking the flash drive and slipping it into his pocket. "Do you have a plan?" Rachel smiled faintly, the kind of smile that only hinted at what she carried. "Not yet, but I'm working on it." They sat in silence a little longer, the world moving gently outside the cafe window. When they finally stood to leave, Maverick paused. "If you ever need more than legal advice," Rachel nodded, "I know where to find you." And as she walked back to her car, the weight on her shoulders didn't vanish. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was carrying it alone. Not been invited, but she didn't need an invitation. Her name, while missing from the guest list, was etched into the very foundations of the company. Heads turned as she entered, some in recognition, others in confusion. A few executives offered polite nods. Others whispered behind champagne glasses. But Rachel kept walking, her presence composed and unbothered. She moved through the crowd like a forgotten melody, suddenly remembered. And then she saw them, Carter and Diana. Diana was dressed in shimmering silver, clinging to Carter's arm like an ornament. Their eyes met across the ballroom. Diana's smirk flickered for a second when she saw Rachel, but it didn't last. She leaned closer to Carter, whispered something, and the two turned away deliberately. Rachel didn't follow. She walked to the edge of the room and accepted a glass of water from a server. She didn't need to speak to be noticed. Midway through the evening, a hush swept through the ballroom as Carter took the stage to address the crowd. His speech was calculated, full of buzzwords about innovation, expansion, and growth. "And none of this," he said with a slight smile, "would be possible without the people behind me, especially Diana Gray, whose contributions have transformed our internal operations." Diana stood, beaming under the spotlight. Rachel sipped her water, her expression unreadable. Maverick, standing in the far corner of the room, watched them both. As Carter spoke, he discreetly raised his phone and recorded the moment, not for public scandal, but for private leverage. Rachel turned away from the stage, choosing instead to study the faces of the board members. Some were impressed. Others looked mildly uncomfortable. A few, she noticed, were clearly disapproving. She tucked that knowledge away. Later, as the crowd applauded and Diana basked in temporary glory, Rachel stepped outside onto the terrace. The cold night air kissed her skin, refreshing and sharp. She closed her eyes, breathing in deeply. "Let them have their moment," she whispered to herself. "It's all borrowed anyway." Behind her, the music swelled. But Rachel no longer danced to their rhythm. She was quietly composing her own. Rachel sat quietly at the back of the room, her face composed, her posture regal despite being seated among assistants and junior staff. She wasn't there to be seen, yet everyone noticed her. The Monroe Holdings branding event was in full swing, and the ballroom buzzed with anticipation. The new slogan, "Redefining Legacy," adorned every banner. Ironically, no one had contributed more to the company's legacy than the woman now sitting unnoticed in the shadows. A few curious onlookers whispered and cast glances her way, wondering why the former Mrs. Monroe was present when her name had been scrubbed from company literature. As Carter stepped onto the stage, his voice commanding as ever, the room fell silent. He began listing company milestones, then turned toward Diana, who stood in a soft lavender gown, glowing under the lights. "This woman," Carter declared, "has revolutionized the way we operate. Diana, your brilliance speaks for itself." Applause erupted. Diana stepped forward to accept the mic, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. "Behind every great man," she began, is a woman who actually gets things done. A low, scattered laugh rippled through the room, some amused, some uneasy. Rachel didn't flinch, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Maverick, standing several feet away, clenched his jaw. Diana continued, soaking up the attention. "We've built something remarkable here," she said, "and I think the days of sentiment and nostalgia slowing down progress are over." Another subtle jab. Rachel sat still, her glass of sparkling water untouched. Maverick moved closer and leaned in. "You okay?" he asked under his breath. Rachel gave the faintest smile. "She just told the world exactly who she is. That's a gift." Maverick nodded, then resumed recording discreetly. As the spotlight danced across Diana's face, and Carter looked on with misplaced pride, Rachel stood quietly and exited the ballroom without fanfare. Outside, she stepped into the cool air, her heels tapping against the pavement. She didn't need to confront them, not tonight. They were too drunk on applause to notice the applause was shallow. She walked down the steps of the hotel alone, head high, her voice echoing in her thoughts. Let them shine. Even borrowed light burns out. And somewhere deep inside, she knew, tonight, they mocked her publicly. Tomorrow, the cost of that laughter would begin to surface. It began subtly, like most invasions. Rachel returned home one afternoon to find Eliana's bedroom walls painted pale pink instead of the sunflower yellow they had chosen together just 2 years ago. Her daughter ran to her excitedly, holding a glittery pillow. "Miss Diana said this is what princesses like," she chirped. Rachel knelt to meet Eliana's eyes, managing a soft smile. "It's beautiful, baby, but next time, let's choose the color together, okay?" Eliana nodded, oblivious to the quiet storm behind her mother's eyes. Upstairs, the guest room had been transformed into a vanity station. Designer heels, expensive perfumes, and a half-open suitcase lined the floor. The air was thick with Diana's floral scent, too loud, too deliberate. One of Rachel's old framed photos had been turned face down on the hallway table. No one had even bothered to remove it, just flipped it like an afterthought. She picked it up slowly, brushed off a fine layer of dust, and placed it back upright. She stood for a moment, letting the silence speak. Downstairs, Carter arrived with his usual casual indifference. "We agreed this house needed some updating," he said when Rachel asked about the changes. "And Diana has a better eye for these things." Rachel nodded slowly, her voice controlled. "So the child's space is now subject to your girlfriend's taste?" Carter sighed. "Don't be dramatic. Eliana loves it." He walked away before she could respond, as if her opinion no longer held weight. That night, Rachel moved quietly through the house, capturing photos of every altered space. The living room throw pillows, the new artwork in the hallway, the wardrobe items hanging beside Carter's suits. Diana wasn't just visiting. She was moving in, marking territory. Rachel didn't scream. She didn't demand. She documented. Later, in the dim light of her study, she looked over the photos and placed them inside a folder titled Home Intrusion. Her hands shook slightly, not from rage, but from the heaviness of being erased in her own home. In a quiet voice she barely recognized as her own, she said, "This was once a love story, but now it's a ledger." Her eyes didn't water. She had no tears left for the decor, only for the dignity she would reclaim. Only what mattered: Eliana's belongings, her own essentials, and a few framed photographs that still held meaning. The rest, the designer bags, the expensive kitchenware, the custom furniture, could stay with the ghosts. His staff watched her with quiet sympathy, offering small gestures of help without needing to be asked. Rachel smiled politely, said little, and kept moving. Eliana clung to her side, holding her favorite teddy bear. "Why are we leaving?" she asked softly. Rachel crouched to her level, brushing a hand over her curls. "Because sometimes home isn't where your things are, it's where you're safe. And happy." Eliana nodded slowly, her little brow furrowed in thought. "Will Daddy come with us?" she asked. Rachel swallowed. "No, sweetheart, but we'll be okay." She kissed her forehead and stood, her heart breaking in places that no one could see. When the last box was loaded, Rachel walked into Carter's office and placed her wedding ring, simple, elegant, now meaningless, on the corner of his desk. No note, no farewell, just silence. As she turned to leave, her eyes flicked to the photo of their wedding day still hanging on the wall. For a moment, she considered taking it down, but she didn't. Let them keep the illusion. Let them stare at it every day and remember what was lost. She walked out without looking back, her heels clicking one last time against the floor she once designed. The new apartment wasn't grand. It was modest, quiet, tucked away in a neighborhood filled with working families and laughter. It smelled like fresh paint and lavender. When Eliana saw her new room, she gasped. "It's yellow again," she squealed. Rachel smiled for real this time. "Only you and I get to choose the colors now." That night, after Eliana fell asleep beside her, Rachel sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling like promises not yet broken. She looked up at the stars, feeling both empty and full. "This is where I begin," she whispered. And in the quiet, she believed it. It arrived in a sleek white envelope, hand-delivered by a suited man who didn't even make eye contact. Rachel stood in the hallway of her new apartment, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned the envelope over. No name on the front, just Monroe R in cold stamped ink. She already knew what was inside. With slow precision, she peeled the flap open and pulled out the divorce papers. The words seemed distant on the page, legal terms coldly arranged to dissolve a life she had once poured herself into. Grounds, irreconcilable differences. Underneath, Carter's signature in blue ink, scrawled with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. Rachel read through the terms, noting the suggestion of a mutually respectful separation and amicable division of assets. The irony twisted her stomach. It was Carter's final performance, a polished legal ending to a marriage already burned to ash. Later that evening, Rachel stood at her kitchen counter, the document lying flat before her as Maverick reviewed it line by line. "He's making this look tidy on paper," he said, frowning. "But the underlying narrative is built on his assumption that you won't fight." Rachel exhaled slowly. "That's exactly what he's counting on." She took a sip of lukewarm tea and studied the lines again. "He doesn't know how much I've kept quiet." Maverick glanced at her, measuring her silence. "You're ready?" She nodded. More than ever. She didn't rush to sign. She didn't scream or send angry messages. She simply picked up her phone and typed a message to Carter. "Received the documents. I'll be in touch. No punctuation. No emotion. Just precision." Across town, Diana grinned over a glass of champagne. "Finally," she purred, scrolling through bridal websites. "She's out of the picture." Carter reclined on the sofa, eyes half closed. "She won't contest it. She's too decent." Diana smirked, resting her head on his chest. "That's the problem with decent women. They think silence is strength." But across the city, in a quiet apartment bathed in amber light, Rachel placed the envelope inside a drawer, turned the key, and whispered to herself, "They'll learn soon enough. My silence has never been weakness. It's been strategy." Inside the small wood-paneled chamber of the family law court, the air was thick with tension. Rachel sat beside Maverick at the far end of the table, dressed in a soft cream blouse and black trousers, her expression calm and unreadable. Across from her, Carter leaned back confidently in his chair, fingers interlaced, while Diana, though not officially part of the proceedings, sat smugly behind him, her red lips curved into the beginnings of a victory smile. The judge entered, adjusted her robe, and began the session with procedural introductions. Maverick opened a black leather folder and handed over a sealed manila envelope. "Your Honor, this contains documentation that should be entered into private record," he said. Rachel didn't speak. She didn't need to. The judge accepted it, nodding. "This will be reviewed under closed seal." Carter glanced at Maverick and chuckled under his breath, throwing in a last-minute trick. "That's not like Rachel." Diana leaned in and whispered, "Relax, she's bluffing." But Rachel sat still, her gaze never leaving the judge's bench. Over the next 30 minutes, Maverick walked the judge through carefully presented timelines, financial statements, travel records, time-stamped photos. Everything Rachel had collected was arranged in chronological order. "While the respondent seeks a clean division," Maverick stated coolly, "my client has evidence that shifts the balance of this dissolution." Carter's attorney, slightly flustered, raised objections, but the judge silenced him. "I'll allow it," she said. Rachel turned to Carter, meeting his gaze for the first time since the papers arrived. "You assumed I'd let you finish this story your way," she said softly. "But you never asked if I was writing my own ending." He blinked, unsettled. Maverick leaned closer to Rachel and whispered, "This is the beginning of the shift." Rachel didn't nod. She just stared forward as the judge announced a 1-week continuation to verify documentation. As they exited the courtroom, Diana hissed, "What did she give them?" Carter didn't answer. For the first time in weeks, he looked unsure. Meanwhile, Maverick held the door open for Rachel. "You okay?" he asked. Rachel smiled faintly, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm not here for revenge," she said. "I'm here to restore what they tried to erase." And that, to Maverick, was far more dangerous. The brunch table sparkled with mimosas, marble platters, and clinking laughter. Diana sat at the head, surrounded by 3 friends she had carefully curated for such occasions, stylish women with sharp tongues and shallow loyalty. "She's already in a rental apartment," Diana said, twirling her spoon over her yogurt parfait. "Probably shopping at discount stores while I pick out centerpieces." One of her friends leaned in. "And Carter? Has he proposed yet?" Diana smirked. "He will, after the final decree. He just needs to feel like it's his decision." They all laughed, sipping from crystal flutes. A few heads turned at a neighboring table, recognizing Carter's name. Diana didn't care. In fact, she raised her voice deliberately. Poor Rachel, always so well-behaved, so composed. She never knew how to fight. She chuckled, oblivious to the reporter seated alone in the corner booth, Grace Hammond from the Sentinel, whose ears perked at the name Monroe. Grace had been covering local legal and corporate scandals for nearly a decade, and she recognized entitlement when she saw it. She watched Diana with a trained eye, noting every exaggerated gesture and self-congratulatory line. Pulling out her phone discreetly, she took a few photos, not of Diana directly, but of the scene, the brunch setting, the tone, the details. Back at Rachel's apartment, Maverick arrived with a small envelope in hand. "You'll want to see this," he said, handing her a printed report. It was a preliminary notice from an online column highlighting inappropriate conduct during ongoing legal proceedings. "Diana's becoming sloppy," he added. Rachel scanned the article, lips tightening as she saw the quotes attributed to a source close to the Monroe Circle. She set the paper down. "Let her keep talking," Rachel said quietly. "The more she underestimates me, the clearer the spotlight will be when the truth lands." Maverick leaned back, watching her carefully. "Are you sure you're ready for the final strike?" Rachel nodded. "No more chess moves. From now on, every step is checkmate." As Diana raised her glass across town, blissfully unaware her brunch had turned into evidence, Rachel lit a candle beside her journal, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Keep laughing, Diana. You won't see the silence coming." Rachel sat quietly across from her therapist, Dr. Amara Ibe, in a softly lit office adorned with shelves of books, leafy plants, and calming earth tones. She hadn't spoken yet. Instead, her fingers absent-mindedly traced the stitching along the arm of the couch. "Take your time," Dr. Amara said gently, her voice steady but warm. Rachel finally looked up, her voice low. "I don't think I stopped loving him until I realized he didn't even try to protect what we had." The words hung in the air, as if waiting for permission to exist. "I'm not angry because he cheated," she continued, blinking slowly. "I'm angry because he let me disappear while another woman wore my life like a borrowed coat." Dr. Amara nodded thoughtfully. "You didn't disappear, Rachel. You were buried, and you're digging yourself out now, one breath at a time." Rachel smiled faintly at that. "I think I forgot how to breathe for a while." That afternoon, Rachel stopped by Eliana's school for the weekly reading circle. The children's laughter filled the room as she read aloud, her voice animated, her smile genuine. Eliana beamed from the front row, raising her hand to answer every question. After class, Rachel helped tape colorful drawings on the wall, laughing with the teachers and even joining the cleanup. It was a small act, but it grounded her. Outside, she and Eliana walked hand in hand toward the car. "Can you come next week too?" Eliana asked eagerly. Rachel nodded. "I'll come every week if you want me to." That evening, Rachel cooked dinner while Eliana danced barefoot to music in the living room. No extravagant chandeliers, no marble counters. Just warmth. Just home. Later, as she sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, she opened her journal and wrote, "My life didn't fall apart. It was pruned, and now I get to grow again on my terms." For the first time in months, Rachel allowed herself to sleep without checking her phone. She didn't need to track Carter's whereabouts. She didn't care what Diana wore or said. The fight wasn't over, but the fear was. And in its place, a quiet, radiant clarity had taken root. The courtroom date was less than a week away, and Rachel could feel the air shift around her with every passing day. Yet instead of pacing or panicking, she prepared. Her days were spent refining timelines, rereading statements, organizing every document Maverick had compiled with meticulous care. At night, when Eliana was asleep, Rachel would sit by her small dining table and rehearse how she would answer each potential question. She no longer sought to defend her worth, only to protect her truth. Meanwhile, across town, Diana excitedly flipped through bridal catalogs in Carter's condo, holding swatches of fabric against her skin. "Do you think a fall wedding is too rushed?" she asked as Carter adjusted his tie in the mirror. He shrugged. "Let's get the paperwork done first. Rachel's not the type to drag it out." Diana chuckled. "She's too proud to beg. It'll be a clean break." Neither of them noticed the news segment that aired later that night, one in which Rachel's name appeared briefly as part of an upcoming feature on women in leadership. Maverick called Rachel the next morning. "You're on the radar now," he said. Quietly, but powerfully, "The narrative is shifting." Rachel smiled as she folded Eliana's clothes. "Let them wonder. I'm not interested in headlines. I'm interested in results." That afternoon, she visited her old seamstress and requested a custom suit for the hearing, something sharp, elegant, and symbolic. "No ruffles," she said. "I want clean lines. Purposeful, no distractions." The woman nodded, eyes misting. "It's time they see you." Meanwhile, Carter's lawyer called to confirm proceedings, adding, "Everything's proceeding smoothly. We expect her to cooperate." Carter merely nodded, sipping whiskey from his office decanter. He had no idea what Rachel was preparing. Diana, confident in her assumed victory, booked a weekend getaway for after the ruling. But back in her apartment, Rachel stood before the mirror in her new suit, holding a single page from her journal. "They want closure. I want correction." She folded the page and slipped it into her purse. No one could see it, but she would carry it as her anchor. The court date loomed, but for Rachel, it wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a chapter written in her own ink. It was the night before the hearing, and the city was quiet under a blanket of stars. Rachel sat in her living room, the only light coming from a small lamp beside the couch. Eliana had been picked up by her aunt for a sleepover, giving Rachel the night to herself. She sat still, almost too still, until a knock came at the door. When she opened it, Maverick stood there, dressed in a charcoal blazer, a folder in one hand and a worn brown envelope in the other. "You'll want to hold on to this," he said, stepping inside. She motioned for him to sit, and he placed the envelope carefully on the coffee table between them. "What is it?" she asked. "Your leverage," he replied. "Just in case they try to smear your name, deny your place in the company, or undermine the truth." Rachel picked it up, felt its weight, and nodded. "I'm ready," she said. Maverick didn't smile. He just looked at her with a quiet, almost protective resolve. "Then let tomorrow speak for itself." They sat in silence for a moment, the tension between them not of fear, but focus. "Do you regret staying so long?" Maverick asked softly, not as her lawyer, but as her friend. Rachel leaned back, her voice calm. "No, because staying taught me how to leave right." She poured them both a glass of water and raised hers gently. "To the version of me I buried to keep everyone else comfortable. May she rest, because tomorrow the real one rises." Maverick clinked his glass against hers with a quiet nod. When he left an hour later, Rachel sat alone, staring at the envelope for a while before sliding it into her briefcase. She placed it beneath her speech notes, not to hide it, but to remind herself of the journey that led her here. Before going to bed, she lit a small candle and whispered a prayer, not for victory, but for peace. Let truth be louder than pain. Let silence finally speak. As she turned off the lights and climbed into bed, she didn't feel afraid. For the first time since it all began, she felt exactly what Diana never expected her to feel, prepared. Courtroom 4B buzzed with tension as spectators and legal aides filled the benches. Rachel entered in a tailored navy suit, her chin lifted, eyes calm. She took her seat beside Maverick without saying a word. Across the room, Diana strutted in beside Carter, clad in a crimson dress that screamed confidence. She glanced at Rachel and smirked, then leaned toward Carter. "She looks like she's attending a job interview," she whispered with a chuckle. Carter grinned. "Let her, it'll be over soon." Diana's eyes scanned the room like a queen awaiting coronation. Cameras weren't allowed, but she posed as if they were. Rachel sat still, her hands folded on her lap, unmoved by the display. Her quiet was unnerving to some, but Diana mistook it for defeat. The judge entered, and the room rose. "Be seated," she said, her voice firm. As Carter's lawyer opened with rehearsed civility, Diana kept glancing toward Rachel, expecting flinches, any sign of fear. But Rachel remained still, her eyes focused on the judge. Maverick leaned over briefly. "Stay steady." This is the part where they think they've already won. Rachel nodded once. When Diana caught Rachel's eye and mouthed, "Too late," Rachel simply looked away. The air shifted, ever so slightly. The storm was nearing. After opening remarks and procedural statements, the judge adjusted her glasses and turned toward Rachel. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, "do you have any claims relevant to company ownership or asset control?" Carter shifted in his seat, suddenly alert. Diana narrowed her eyes. Rachel opened her folder and pulled out a single document, handing it to Maverick, who passed it to the clerk. "Yes, Your Honor," Rachel replied. "This is a notarized clause signed between myself and Mr. Monroe in our early partnership years. It stipulates transfer of company control in the event of emotional abandonment or infidelity." The courtroom stiffened. The judge took a long pause, scanning the page. Carter's face paled. "What is this?" he muttered. Diana leaned forward. "Wait, what clause?" Carter looked like he'd been punched. "I don't remember this." Maverick stood. "The document is dated and bears the defendant's original signature. We request it be entered into evidence immediately." The judge nodded slowly. "So ordered." Diana's mouth dropped open. "That's not possible," she whispered harshly. But Rachel didn't even look at her. Instead, she folded her hands again, voice steady. "Your Honor, I have remained silent. But I have not been idle." Silence spread across the room like a crack in glass. And then it shattered. The judge's voice was clear as she addressed the room. "According to the clause, if emotional abandonment or proven infidelity is established, 70% of Monroe Holdings reverts to Mrs. Rachel Monroe." Carter stared blankly, his jaw slack. Diana's hands clutched her seat as if gravity had suddenly shifted. "That can't be valid," Carter barked. This wasn't supposed to." But Maverick was already holding up supporting documents, photos, receipts, and logs. "Infidelity is not only evident, Your Honor, it's documented. Financial misconduct and emotional neglect supplement the claim." The judge tapped her pen slowly, signaling order. Diana stood suddenly. "This is a trap. She planned this." The judge banged her gavel. "Miss Gray, please remain seated or leave the courtroom." She sat, trembling. Carter, still stunned, whispered, "You planned this the whole time?" Rachel finally turned to him, voice low but steady. "No, Carter. I prepared for it when I realized you never valued what we built." Diana blinked, breathless. Rachel's gaze returned to the judge. "This isn't revenge, it's restoration." A hush fell again. Everyone could feel it now. This wasn't the quiet before the storm. This was the reckoning. And the woman they had counted out was now standing in the eye of it, untouched. Maverick stood calmly as he began laying out the evidence, his voice even and deliberate. "We have hotel invoices spanning 8 months, several with signatures from Mr. Monroe. Attached are matching timestamps from corporate accounts used to cover personal expenses involving Miss Gray." The judge reviewed the documents in silence. Then came the photos, timestamped, location tagged, and irrefutable. Carter shifted uncomfortably, the color draining from his face as the screen displayed one particular image. Diana wrapped in his coat outside a private suite, taken only 2 months after Rachel had left their home. "There's more," Maverick added. Unreported gifts, misuse of company funds, and false accounting entries tied to Carter's discretionary budget. Gasps filled the courtroom. Diana closed her eyes. Carter's lawyer requested a recess. "Your Honor, we need time to review these materials." This was not disclosed during discovery. The judge raised a brow. "You had ample opportunity. The evidence stands." Rachel remained still, but her silence spoke volumes. Diana turned sharply to Carter. "You told me there was nothing on us," she hissed. "You swore," Carter didn't respond. He simply leaned back, rubbing his temples. Maverick whispered to Rachel, "You just took the foundation out from under them." She didn't gloat. She simply replied, "No." I just stopped holding it up. The break was granted. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Diana's mask of poise completely cracked. "I'm not going back in there," she snapped, pacing in her heels. "This is insane." She played us like pawns. Carter stood frozen near the bench, his face unreadable. "You don't understand," Diana continued, louder now. "This wasn't supposed to happen. You said she was soft, weak. You said she'd fold." Carter didn't look at her. "I didn't think she'd use it. I forgot that clause even existed." Diana's voice rose. "Of course you did. Because you never thought she'd fight back." A small crowd of reporters and bystanders gathered quietly at the edge of the hallway, phones raised. Diana stormed out of the courthouse with shaky dignity, only to have her heels snap dramatically on the courthouse steps. She fell, caught only by a nearby photographer who captured every second. Flashbulbs lit up as she screamed, "Get those cameras out of my face," but the damage was done. Back inside, the courtroom door closed behind her for the last time. Rachel watched the scene through the window, but said nothing. Maverick turned to her. "She's out." And the court saw everything. Rachel finally exhaled. Then that chapter is over. But her eyes were still sharp. She knew the real reckoning was Carter's. Carter sat slouched in his chair, no longer the confident executive, but a man unraveling in real time. His tie was loose, his fingers twitching as the judge prepared her next remarks. Maverick had concluded the presentation of evidence, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Carter's lawyer leaned over to whisper something, but Carter waved him off. His eyes darted to Rachel, as if trying to read her, perhaps even searching for a trace of the woman who once forgave him for late nights and broken promises. But she didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any words she could have spoken. "Mr. Monroe," the judge said sternly, "your actions have not only violated marital trust, but also raised questions regarding corporate governance. We will address the ownership ruling momentarily." Carter finally broke. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered, his voice cracking. "She was never supposed to use that clause. We were partners." Maverick leaned in coolly. "She was. You just stopped treating her like one." Carter slammed his fist on the table. "She's taking everything." Rachel lifted her eyes then, calm and deliberate. "No, Carter. I'm reclaiming what was mine all along." The words struck like a gavel of their own. And for the first time, Carter understood this wasn't a loss. It was justice delivered in full. The final ruling had been read. The judge's tone was impartial, but the weight of the judgment was seismic. Rachel Monroe was now the majority shareholder of Monroe Holdings. The courtroom emptied slowly, with whispers trailing behind every step. Carter remained seated, his expression hollow, like a man who had just watched his empire burn from the inside. Rachel walked toward him, not for revenge, not to gloat, but for closure. Standing beside him, she spoke softly. "You once said I was too soft to lead. That softness built the brand you betrayed. Don't forget that." Carter didn't lift his head. "You waited years to do this?" he asked bitterly. Rachel shook her head. "No, I waited for the right moment to stop shrinking." Her heels clicked softly as she walked away, each step peeling her away from the ashes he created. Outside the courtroom, Maverick joined her beneath the portico, briefcase in hand. "You didn't have to say anything to him," he said. Rachel looked up at the gray sky. "Yes, I did, but not for him, for me." Cameras flashed, reporters crowded around, but Rachel gave no interviews. Her statement had been made in silence and strategy. Maverick looked at her with admiration. "You didn't just win a case, you reclaimed your voice." Rachel smiled faintly. "And this time I'm keeping it." That evening, Rachel and Eliana returned to their apartment. The mood was peaceful, almost too still for what the day had brought. After dinner, Eliana disappeared into her room with markers and paper while Rachel washed dishes quietly. A few minutes later, Eliana returned holding an envelope. "Can you give this to Daddy?" she asked, holding it out gently. Rachel dried her hands and took it. "What did you write?" Eliana shrugged. "Just stuff. He looked really sad on the news. Rachel tucked the letter into her purse and pulled her daughter into her arms. You have a kind heart, baby. That's your superpower. Eliana beamed. Just like yours, Mommy. Rachel kissed her forehead, but the truth was heavier than words she could explain. Later that night, Rachel sat alone and opened the envelope. In uneven handwriting it read, Dear Daddy, I still love you. But Mommy is really strong. I want to be like her when I grow up. Maybe you should try too. Rachel closed her eyes, the tears coming quietly this time. She folded the letter and placed it inside her journal. Not to send, but to remember. Eliana's words were simple, but they held more wisdom than any courtroom ever could. There was no champagne, no ballroom, no parade. Just a quiet dinner at a small bistro Maverick had chosen, Rachel, Eliana, and him seated around a round table tucked into the corner. Eliana drew patterns with her crayons on the paper tablecloth, while Maverick toasted with ginger ale. To the woman who reminded everyone that silence is not surrender, he said. Rachel chuckled, lifting her glass of hibiscus tea. To survival and peace. The clink of glasses was soft, but it echoed with meaning. They talked of simple things. Eliana's school play, Maverick's chess tournament, Rachel's plans to restructure the board. No gossip, no bitterness, just breath and beginning. After dinner, they walked through the park nearby. Eliana ran ahead, chasing fireflies while Rachel and Maverick trailed behind slowly. You ever think about what's next? He asked. Rachel nodded. I think about building, not reacting. This time, the blueprint is mine. Maverick smiled. You've always been the architect. Now the world just knows it. At home, after Eliana had gone to bed, Rachel lit a single candle in her study and wrote in her journal. Today wasn't about reclaiming power. It was about returning home to myself. The quiet around her wasn't emptiness. It was freedom. The press conference was brief, but every seat was filled. Reporters from financial journals, women's leadership forums, and major networks gathered, eager to hear from the woman they once dismissed as the quiet wife. Rachel stepped up to the podium in a tailored ivory suit, calm and unshaken. No entourage, no dramatics, just grace. Cameras flashed as she began. Thank you for being here, she said, her voice strong but serene. For years, I was part of building a company and a life that others believed belonged only to my husband. Today, I reclaim my name, my equity, and my voice. A ripple of applause followed. She continued, This isn't a story of revenge. It's a reminder that women don't have to scream to lead. Sometimes we simply wait for the right moment to speak. A reporter raised a hand. What would you tell women in similar situations? Rachel paused, thoughtful. Don't rush to be loud. Just be sure you're building while they underestimate you. Maverick stood in the back, arms folded, pride in his eyes. When Rachel stepped down, she walked past Carter, seated among the attendees, head bowed. She didn't stop. Outside, the boardroom awaited. She glanced at the building's engraved plaque. That meeting, unlike her past, would begin with her voice at the head. Months later, Monroe Holdings unveiled its new headquarters with a private ceremony. The glass-paneled entrance gleamed under the morning sun. Rachel stood in a wide-legged navy jumpsuit, Eliana by her side, as the final covers were pulled off the steel plaque at the entrance. The crowd read in silence, our Monroe Holdings vision. Integrity, legacy. Carter wasn't there. Neither was Diana. The chapter was fully closed. Eliana tugged her mother's hand, pointing to the words. That's your name, Mommy. Rachel knelt beside her. It's ours, she said. It stands for everything we survived. Applause rose behind them, but Rachel kept her focus on her daughter's smile. It meant more than the applause ever could. Later, in her new corner office, Rachel sat alone for a moment, overlooking the skyline. Her desk was clean, just a photo of Eliana, her journal, and the original document Carter once forgot existed. She didn't need to frame it. She didn't need to gloat. She just needed to remember. Maverick entered, knocking gently. Board's ready. Rachel stood confident. So am I. As she walked into the boardroom, the room stood for her, not out of obligation, but respect. She had walked through fire quietly. And now she led with flame. Here's the Bible verse, Ecclesiastes 3 verse 7, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Rachel's story reflects this truth perfectly. She chose silence not out of fear, but out of wisdom, waiting for the exact moment when speaking would not just reveal truth, but restore what was lost. Her restraint was her strength, and her timing was divine. Moral of the story: silence is not surrender. It is sometimes the highest form of strategy. The one who chooses dignity over drama may lose the noise, but she wins the legacy. Rachel's journey teaches that strength isn't always loud, and power isn't always flashy. True resilience lies in knowing your worth, keeping your peace while you prepare, and standing firm when the time is right. Justice may be delayed, but it is never denied to those who endure with wisdom and purpose. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.